Dakshinayam
Akuti sunaraman at dakshinayam
Lokachayasya Mahitim Maharavyadachim
Lokatrayasya mahatim ahradyadartim
Svayambhuvena Manuna Haryaityanuktaha
Swayam bhuvena manuna harirityanukta
Tato rucher ajanaya suyaman suyagya
Jato rucher ajanayat suyaman suyagya
Akuti suner amaranata dakshinayam
Akuti sunar amaran at dakshinayam
Lokatrayasya mahati maharadhyarartim
Lokatrayasya mahatim ahradyadartim
Swayambhuvena manuna harihi ityanukutaha
Swayambhuvena manuna harirityanuktaha
Yato ruser anayanyat svayaman svayagnya
Jato rucher ajanayat suyaman suyagya
Akuti sunar amanaran atha dakshinayam
Akuti sunar amaran at dakshinayam
Lokatrayasya mahatim aharadyad artim
Lokatrayasya mahatim aharadyarartim
Svayam bhuvenya manuna haririti anuktaha
Swayam bhuvena manuna harirityanuktaha Jataha Ruchehe, wife of Prajapati, Ajanayat gave birth. Suyaman, headed by Suyama. Suyagyaha, Suyagya. Akuti Sunahi, the son of Akuti. Amaran, the demigods. Atha, thus. Dakshinayam, unto the wife of the name Dakshina. Loka, the planetary systems. Trayasya, of the three. Mahatim, very great. Aharat, diminished. Yet, all those. Artim, distresses. Swayambhuvena, by the Manu named Swayambhuva. Manuna, by the father of mankind. Harihi, iti, Hari, iti, first begot Suyagya in the womb of his wife Akuti, and then Suyagya begot demigods, headed by Suyama, in the womb of his wife Dakshina. Suyagya, as the Indradeva, diminished very great miseries in the three planetary systems, upper, lower, and intermediate. And because he so diminished the miseries of the universe, he was later called Hari by the great father of mankind named Swayambhuva Manu. Therefore, in order to guard against the invention of unauthorized incarnations of God by the fanciful, less intelligent persons, the name of the father of the bona fide incarnation is also mentioned in the authorized revealed scriptures. No one, therefore, can be accepted as an incarnation of the Lord if his father's name, as well as the name of the village or place in which he appears, is not mentioned by the authorized scriptures. In the Bhagavad-Gita, the name of the Kalki incarnation, which is to take place in almost 400,000 years, is mentioned along with the name of his father and the name of the village in which he will appear. The sane man, therefore, does not accept any cheap edition of an incarnation without reference to the authorized scriptures. Jaturucher ajanayat suyaman suyagya akutisunur amaran atadakshinayam lokatrayasya mahatim aharad yad artim swayambhuvena manuna harir ityunukta. Translation: The Prajapati first begot Suyagya in the womb of his wife Akuti, and then Suyagya begot demigods headed by Suyama in the womb of his wife Dakshina. Suyagya, as the Interdeva, diminished very great miseries in the three planetary systems, upper, lower, and intermediate, and because he so diminished the miseries of the universe, he was later called Hari by the great father of mankind, namely Swayambhuva Manu. We would love to hear from you, Maharaj. So here we're seeing Prabhupada delineate some criterion for the incarnations of the Lord. And Prabhupada gives an example of the Kalki incarnation, where it's given in one of the authorized scriptures. And the incarnation is named. The time is delineated. The name of the incarnation's father is delineated, and the name of the village which the incarnation will appear is delineated. So Prabhupada decides or declares that a sane person does not accept any cheap edition of an incarnation without reference to the authorized scriptures. So we can understand that there are many insane persons who are accepting cheap incarnations without reference to the scriptures. This is an unfortunate, a very unfortunate thing. And persons are being cheated because they want to be cheated. A sane man doesn't want to be cheated because he knows that it's not in his self-interest. But a crazy man doesn't know. So this is one of the incarnations, scheduled incarnations. And there are different types of incarnations, and they enact different pastimes in the material world, and they have different functions. So maybe we can read another text here. Text 3. Jagye chad kadama grihe dvijadeva hutyam strivi samam navavir atmagatim samatre. Uche yayatma shamalanguna sangapankam asmin vidhuya kapilasya gatim prapede. Translation. The Lord then appeared as the Kapila incarnation, being the son of the Prajapati Brahmana Kardama and his wife Devahuti, along with 9 other women, sisters. He spoke to his mother about self-realization, by which in that very lifetime she became fully cleansed of the mud of the material modes and thereby achieved liberation, the path of Kapila. Purport. The instructions of Lord Kapila to his mother Devahuti are fully described in the 3rd canto, chapters 25 through 32 of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and anyone who follows the instructions can achieve the same liberation obtained by Devahuti. The Lord spoke Bhagavad-Gita, and thereby Arjuna achieved self-realization. And even today, anyone who follows the path of Arjuna can also attain the same benefit as Sri Arjuna. The scriptures are meant for this purpose. Foolish, unintelligent persons make their own interpretations by imagination and thus mislead their followers, causing them to remain in the dungeon of material existence. However, simply by following the instructions imparted by Lord Krishna or Lord Kapila, one can obtain the highest benefit even today. The word Atmagatim is significant in the sense of perfect knowledge of the Supreme. One should not be satisfied simply by knowing the qualitative equality with the Lord and the living being. One should know the Lord as much as can be known by our limited knowledge. It is impossible for the Lord to be known perfectly as he is, even by such liberated persons as Shiva or Brahma. So what to speak of other demigods or men in this world? Still, by following the principles of the great devotees and the instructions available in the scriptures, one can know to a considerable extent the features of the Lord. His Lordship Kapila, the incarnation of the Lord, instructed his mother fully about the personal form of the Lord, and thereby she realized the personal form of the Lord and was able to achieve a place in the Vaikuntha Loka, where Lord Kapila predominates. Every incarnation of the Lord has his own abode in the spiritual sky. Therefore, Lord Kapila also has his separate Vaikuntha planet. The spiritual sky is not void. There are innumerable Vaikuntha planets, and in each of them the Lord, by his innumerable expansions, predominates, and the pure devotees who are there also live in the same style as the Lord and his eternal associates. When the Lord descends personally or by his personal plenary expansions, such incarnations are called Amsha, Kala, Guna, Yuga, and Manvantara incarnations. And when the Lord's associates descend by the order of the Lord, such incarnations are called Shaktyavesha incarnations. But in all cases, all the incarnations are supported by the invulnerable statements of the authorized scriptures, and not by any imagination of some self-interested propagandist. Such incarnations of the Lord in either of the above categories always declare the Supreme Personality of Godhead to be the ultimate truth. The impersonal conception of the Supreme Truth is just a process of negation of the form of the Lord from the mundane conception of the Supreme Truth. The living entities, by their very constitution, are spiritually as good as the Lord, and the only difference between them is that the Lord is always supreme and pure, without contamination by the modes of material nature, whereas the living entities are apt to be contaminated by association with the material modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance. This contamination by the material modes can be washed off completely by knowledge, renunciation, and devotional service. Devotional service to the Lord is the ultimate issue, and therefore those who are directly engaged in the devotional service of the Lord not only acquire the necessary necessary knowledge in spiritual science, but also attain detachment from material connection and are thus promoted to the kingdom of God by complete liberation, as stated in the Bhagavad-Gita 14.26. Mam chayo vicharina bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samatitaitan brahmabhunyaya kalpate. Even in the non-liberated stage, a living entity can be directly engaged in the transcendental loving service of the personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, or his plenary expansions like Rama and Narasingha. Thus, with the proportionate improvement of such transcendental devotional service, the devotee makes definite progress towards Brahmagatim or Atmagatim, and ultimately attains Kapilasya Gatim, or the abode of the Lord without difficulty. The antiseptic potency of devotional service to the Lord is so great that it can neutralize the material infection even in the present life of a devotee. A devotee does not need to wait for his next birth for complete liberation. Vagne chadda kardama grihe dvijade vahutyam stribi samam navabir atmagatim svamatre. Uche yayatmas shamalam gunasanga pankam asmin vidhuya kapilasya gatim prapede. Translation. The Lord then appeared as the Kapila incarnation, being the son of the Prajapati Brahmana Kardama and his wife Devahuti, along with 9 other women, sisters. He spoke to his mother about self-realization, by which in that very lifetime she became fully cleansed of the mud of the material modes and thereby achieved liberation, the path of Kapila. So in this purport, Prabhupada describes that the Srimad Bhagavatam contains the instructions from Kapila to his mother Devahuti, and this type of instruction and Devahuti's subsequent attainment of liberation is comparable to the instruction by Sri Krishna to Sri Arjuna and Arjuna's subsequent liberation. The scriptures are meant for this purpose. So even today, Prabhupada describes that we can achieve similar results by taking the instructions in a similar mood as they were received by Devahuti or Sri Arjuna. The next paragraph, Prabhupada describes the word Atmagatim in the sense of perfect knowledge of the Supreme. So we should not be satisfied just by understanding that we are one in quality with the Lord, but we should try to understand as much as we possibly can about the Lord. And this was followed, or this was practiced by Devahuti. And this knowledge is described in the scriptures, not just that we are the same as the Lord, but a lot of information is described about the Lord, his personal form. Specifically, Lord Kapila Dev describes to his mother the supreme personal form of the Lord. So the Lord is not impersonal, and by hearing about the personal form of the Lord from the Lord himself, as Lord Kapila, Devahuti actually realized that personal form of the Lord and attained or achieved a place in the Vaikuntha Loka where the Lord predominates himself. So the spiritual sky is not void. There are many Vaikuntha planets, and in those planets, the Lord predominates in different forms. And the Lord's associates, the pure devotees, they live there on those different planets in a similar style. When the Lord descends, Prabhupada takes some time to describe about the different incarnations. As we were discussing, there's Amsha, Kala, Guna, Yuga, and Manvantar, and also Shaktavesha. These are different types of personal dissensions by the Lord, or personal plenary expansions. Plenary is a word which means full. So these are full expansions. These are the Lord himself presenting himself in a different form, a different attitude, in order to perform a certain activity. So there's the Amsha, Kala, Guna, Yuga, and Manvantar, and there's also Shaktavesha. So the Shaktavesha incarnation are when the Lord's associates descend by the order of the Lord. This is important. Prabhupada takes some time. He says, all these cases, these are supported by the invulnerable statements of the authorized scriptures. So this is important, that the Lord's empowered associates who have descended from the spiritual sky are also, these Shaktavesha avatars also must be corroborated with the scriptures. And we rely on the Guru Parampara to help us understand the scriptures. So we also need confirmation from the acharyas on how to understand which incarnations are actually there. We may not be able to understand alone, as the scriptures are very mysterious and we're not necessarily able to enter into them without the mercy of the acharyas. So that should be, we should try to understand the incarnations from such liberated souls who have heard in disciplic succession. So the impersonal conception of the supreme truth is just a process of negation of the form of the Lord from the mundane conception of the supreme truth. So the idea with the impersonal form or the impersonal conception is that we're thinking that form, matter, is temporary. So then we're thinking that the supreme is above matter. So then that can't be, form cannot be found in the supreme. And it's just a negation, right? There's no positive information about the supreme. They're just saying it because the temporary world has form, then the supreme must not have form. But it's not a full process of analysis. And actually, if there's form here, then that must mean that there must be form within the supreme, or else how will it exist in the product? So then the next paragraph, Prabhupada discusses that there is a spiritual equality with the Lord. The living entities, by their very constitution, are spiritually as good as the Lord. But the difference between them is that the living entities can be contaminated very easily by the modes of nature, and the Lord is never contaminated. He's always supreme and pure. When the living entities associate with the material modes of nature, Guna Sangha, when we associate with the modes of material nature, then we are contaminated. That contamination is similar to a drop of pure water which touches the muddy earth and turns into muddy water. The water is originally pure, just like the Lord is pure in the spiritual sky, and the living entity contacts the material modes and becomes contaminated. Prabhupada in the purport, in the translation, he uses the word mud, and the Sanskrit for that is pankam. Gunasanga Pankam Asmin Vidhuya, which means that Devahuti, right? It's interesting. This is the third line of this. Uche, which means uttered. Vacha. Uche yayatma shamalam. Yayatma shamalam means by which the coverings of the spirit soul, which are then described, guna sanga pankam, associated with the material modes of nature, the mud. So the coverings of the spirit soul, which are like a mud, accumulated by association with the material modes, guna sanga, vidhuya, asmin vidhuya, which means in this very life, she was washed off. And then she achieved Kapilasya Gatim, that place where Lord Kapila actually lives. She achieved that place, the liberation or that destination there, Prapede, achieved. So, the living entity can be washed off by what? Prabhupada describes by knowledge, renunciation, and devotional service. And then he spends a little time describing how devotional service is actually the wellspring of both knowledge and renunciation, detachment. This is described in the Bhagavad-Gita, chapter 14, text 26. So, mam chayo vyabhicharena. So, unto me, one who vyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate. Vyabhicharena is the quality of the bhakti yogena sevate. The undeviated, unflinching, uninterrupted devotional service to the Supreme Lord, this bhakti yoga, sagunan samatitaitan, automatically he crosses over the modes of material nature very easily, and brahmabhuyaya kalpate, he achieves his status in the Brahman platform, which means that that pure spiritual spark is now pure again, just like the raindrop which has been filtered becomes pure drop again. Brahmabhuyaya kalpate. The Lord is Brahman. He's actually Para-Brahman, and we cannot associate with the Lord truly until we are also situated in Brahman, which means that we have to become free from the modes of material nature. Sagunan samati dhyaitan. And how we do it? By undeviated or uninterrupted, fully focused vyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate unto Krishna. Mam chayo, he says, unto me. So this is the way to become purified from the material modes and associate with the Lord in our real state. Krishna says, Prabhupada describes here that, right, in the non-liberated stage, the living entity can be directly engaged in the loving service of the Lord in any of his forms. But we understand that's by the potency of the acharyas, by the strength of their connection with the Supreme Lord, they can bestow service upon us. We have to be initiated into such service, actually. It's not that we can escape the modes of material nature and attain the platform of Bhakti Yoga by our own endeavors. It's actually the mercy of the Supreme Lord and the mercy of the Guru that we receive the seed of devotional service. So this practice of devotional service can award us the progress towards the spiritual sky, where we can actually find the abode of the Lord. And this antiseptic potency of devotional service to the Lord is so great that it can neutralize the material infection even in the present life of the devotee. It can happen in one lifetime, as it happened with Devahuti, and he can wait for us. He says, a devotee does not need to wait for his next birth for complete liberation. This should be taken seriously by the devotees, and we shouldn't try to postpone it. Humility is one thing, but don't have to be lazy. I know it's very difficult, at least for myself, but Prabhupada is describing, as well as Shukadev Goswami himself, that it's possible even in one lifetime. So we shouldn't think otherwise. Okay, thank you very much, devotees. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.